Story 1. The Vanishing of Victor. This all took place in my home country of Brazil, in a sleepy little town where the air was thick with secrets and the nights were darker than they should have been. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, or at least they think they do. And it's here that my buddy Raphael had a friend named Victor. Now, I never met Victor personally, but from everything Raphael told me, he was one of those guys who could light up a room just by walking into it. Funny, charming, and just handsome enough to make women swoon without even trying. He had this way about him, you know? The kind of confidence that made you think nothing bad could ever happen to him. But bad things don't discriminate. One day, Raphael told me Victor had managed to score a date with a model. A model. When Raphael heard this, he couldn't help but laugh. A model? Seriously? Raphael asked him, anyone I'd know? Victor just smirked and handed over his phone. On the screen was an OnlyFans page. The profile belonged to someone named Sophia, a new account with only a handful of pictures and videos. But even with so little content, it was clear she was stunning. The kind of stunning that makes you forget how to breathe for a second. Raphael recognized her immediately. Sophia wasn't just some random girl from the internet. She was local. Everyone in town knew who she was. Young, beautiful, and impossible to miss. Raphael used to joke that her curves could make a grown man cry, and not in the poetic way. Victor explained how he'd met her at a cafe downtown. She'd taken his phone and pulled up her OnlyFans page instead of giving him her number. From there, he subscribed and started messaging her. At first, she turned him down when he asked her out, but Victor wasn't the kind of guy to take no for an answer. He kept asking until one day she sent him a hidden message behind a paywall. Curious and wealthy enough not to care, Victor paid to unlock it. The message wasn't what he expected. No risque photo or flirty reply. Just an address and a time for their date, along with instructions to bring money for dinner. Raphael thought the whole thing sounded sketchy from the start. He warned Victor not to go through with it, especially since Sophia already had a boyfriend, a guy named Diego who was bad news wrapped in worse intentions. Diego wasn't just mean, he was dangerous. The kind of guy whose name made people lower their voices when they spoke about him. But Victor waved off Raphael's concerns like they were nothing more than smoke in the wind. She told me they broke up, Victor said confidently. That evening, Victor dressed sharp and hopped on his moped to meet Sophia. Raphael didn't hear from him again that night. Not unusual for Victor if things were going well. But when morning came and there was still no word, Raphael started to worry. By afternoon, his concern turned into dread. Victor wasn't answering his phone or replying to messages. Days passed without any sign of him. His family hadn't seen him. His boss said he never showed up for work. Even his moped had vanished without a trace. The police? They were no help at all. They shrugged it off as an adult man choosing to disappear on his own terms. Never mind that this wasn't like Victor at all. Meanwhile, Sophia kept posting on her OnlyFans account as if nothing had happened. Raphael decided to subscribe himself, not because he was interested in her content, but because he hoped it might give him some kind of clue about what happened to Victor. One day, Raphael decided to send Sophia a direct message, asking if she knew where Victor was or if he was okay. Her reply wasn't text. It was an image hidden behind another paywall. Raphael hesitated, but couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to see what was behind it. So he paid. The image that loaded made his blood run cold. A close-up shot of a dirty shovel held by a man's hand, with fresh dirt caked along its edge. In the background was an open grave, large enough for one person. Raphael tried messaging her again and again, desperate for answers. But Sophia never replied after that. A few weeks later, both she and Diego disappeared from town entirely. Months passed without any sign of them or Victor. Then one night, just as Raphael had started to accept that he might never know what really happened, he received a notification. Sophia had uploaded one final post before deleting her account entirely. The photo was blurry but unmistakable. Sophia standing in what looked like a dark forest at night, her face bruised and bloodied, one eye swollen shut. Her hands were raised defensively, as if shielding herself from someone or something just out of frame. There was no caption, and then nothing. Her account vanished moments later. Diego never came back to town after that night either, and for everyone's sake, I hope he never does. As for Victor, his name became another ghost story whispered among friends late at night, when the wind howled through the trees and shadows danced on the walls. A reminder that sometimes charm and confidence aren't enough to keep the darkness at bay, especially when it's already waiting for you with a shovel in hand. Story 2. The Doppelganger Within. I was 24 years old, and the weight of failure pressed down on me like the oppressive humidity of a storm about to break. Post-graduation life was supposed to be a new chapter, but it felt more like a blank page. Job applications disappeared into the void of cyberspace, unanswered and unacknowledged. My parents, ever the paragons of silent judgment, dropped hints sharper than daggers about my overstayed welcome in their home. The only reprieve from the suffocating sense of inadequacy was John, my boyfriend, my anchor, my only cheerleader in a world that seemed to conspire against me. John had his own ghost, though. His ex-girlfriend had died tragically, a brain tumor stealing her away after months in a coma. He rarely spoke of her, but when he did, his voice carried the weight of grief that time hadn't fully dulled. I admired his strength, his ability to move forward despite the shadow she cast over his past. He told me once that she'd been beautiful, vibrant, and full of life before illness claimed her. I didn't pry further. Some doors are better left unopened. When John suggested OnlyFans as a way to make money, while I waited for job offers that never came, I balked at first. The idea felt desperate, but desperation has a way of softening the edges of your pride. It's just pictures, I told myself. Nothing too revealing. And so, one night, armed with lingerie and shaky confidence, I created an account. The response was tepid at first, just a trickle of subscribers and modest tips. But then he appeared, a user whose screen name was an innocuous jumble of letters and numbers, but whose presence loomed large in my inbox. He was relentless, requesting photos and videos almost daily. At first, it was flattering, validation wrapped in dollar signs. But soon his requests took on a peculiar edge. "Can you take a picture with your foot behind your head?" he asked one day. Odd, but harmless enough. "How about a video where you pretend to be asleep on the couch?" Another strange request, but again, nothing alarming. Then came the darker asks. "Cover yourself in fake blood and lie on the floor like you've been murdered." He said it reminded him of Gone Girl. My stomach churned at the thought, but John convinced me to go along with it. "It's just acting," he said with a shrug. "If it pays well, who cares?" The money was good, better than I'd ever imagined. But with every bizarre request fulfilled, I felt pieces of myself slipping away. He wanted me to dye my hair black and wear heavy makeup that made my reflection feel like that of a stranger. He paid extra for daily videos of me running on a treadmill until sweat drenched my skin. It was as though he was sculpting me into something or someone else. I lost weight rapidly from the constant running and began to feel like an actress trapped in an endless performance for an audience of one. My OnlyFans account became less about self-expression and more about appeasing this faceless user who seemed to hold my financial stability hostage. One evening, after months of the charade, I decided enough was enough. I stopped uploading content altogether and tried to reclaim my identity by spending more time offline with John. For a while, things felt normal again, almost happy. But happiness has a way of lulling you into complacency before the storm hits. One night, while John showered after dinner, curiosity got the better of me. I hadn't checked my OnlyFans account in weeks and wondered if that persistent user had moved on to torment someone else. My laptop was upstairs, so I grabbed John's instead. It was closer, and opened the site. What greeted me wasn't just shocking, it was soul-crushing. The account was already logged in his account. The username staring back at me wasn't just familiar. It was a username, the one that had been messaging me for months with increasingly disturbing requests. My heart hammered in my chest as realization dawned like the slow creep of sunlight over a graveyard. John had been orchestrating everything. The treadmill videos, the fake blood scenes, it had all been him. I slammed the laptop shut in blind panic, but froze when I noticed his desktop wallpaper. A photo of him with his ex-girlfriend. Her hair was jet black, her makeup dark and dramatic. She looked eerily familiar. Not because I'd seen her before, but because she looked like me. Or rather, what he'd been molding me into. My eyes darted around the room as if seeing it for the first time. Framed photos on his dresser showed her laughing at some long-forgotten joke. Even her perfume bottle sat untouched on a shelf like an unholy relic. The shower turned off abruptly, snapping me out of my trance-like horror. Footsteps approached down the hall as I scrambled to compose myself. When John entered the room, towel slung casually over his shoulder, he smiled at me like nothing had changed, as if he hadn't just shattered every ounce of trust between us. "Everything okay?" he asked innocently. I managed a weak nod but couldn't meet his eyes. That night, as he slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, haunted not by ghosts or monsters, but by something far more terrifying, the man I thought I knew. In the days that followed, I packed my things under the guise of visiting family and left without looking back. Sometimes I wonder if John ever realized what gave him away, or if he still sits in that room surrounded by memories he refuses to let go of. But one thing is certain. When you love someone who can't let go of their past, sometimes they'll drag you down into it with them, and you might not recognize yourself when you finally escape. Story 3. Blackmail in the Shadows. I'll tell you this story the way it happened to me, as if you were sitting right here, leaning in close, because some things are too terrifying to keep locked up in your own head. My name is Jennifer, or at least, that's what I'll call myself for now. I was a broke medical student, drowning in debt, and surviving on crackers and instant noodles. The kind of broke that makes you desperate enough to do things you'd never imagine. That's where this all started, desperation. It was late one night, and I was cramming for a biology exam. The kind of night where the clock ticks louder than your thoughts, and the air feels heavy with exhaustion. That's when I heard the knock. Not just any knock, loud, insistent, like someone trying to break through the door with their fist. Jennifer, can you answer the door? It's Charlie, my landlord. I froze. Charlie was unsettling. He had this way of looking at you that made your skin crawl, like he was peeling back layers you didn't want anyone to see. I opened the door a crack, just enough to meet his eyes without letting him inside. "You know your rent's due, right?" he said, his voice oily with fake concern. "I'll get it to you by tomorrow," I stammered. He leaned closer, his breath sour and hot. "You know, I take other forms of payment." My stomach turned. "I'm good," I said quickly and slammed the door before he could say anything else. That encounter should have been the worst part of my night, but it wasn't. Not even close. I had a decent following on social media. Nothing huge, but enough that people noticed me. Lately, some of them had been asking if I had an OnlyFans account. At first, I laughed it off. But then the numbers in my bank account started mocking me louder than my conscience ever could. So one night, in a haze of desperation and hunger, I signed up. It wasn't hard. A few provocative selfies, some carefully curated posts. It felt like a game at first. Within minutes of promoting it on Instagram, carefully hidden from family and friends, I got my first subscriber. The username was generic, John_Doe_1984. His first message was simple. "Hey, beautiful, happy to be your first OnlyFans sub." I replied politely, "Thank you. Let me know if there's anything specific you'd like to see." His response came quickly. "How about some lingerie pics?" I hesitated, but reminded myself why I was doing this. Rent money didn't grow on trees. So I obliged. He paid immediately. A lump sum that made my heart race with relief and unease. But then things got strange. The messages started flooding in after midnight. At first, they were impatient. Where are you? Then angry, answer me, ho. And finally apologetic. I'm sorry. Please don't ignore me. I should have blocked him right then and there. But when he offered $200 for a video of me crying on camera, something inside me broke. Maybe it was exhaustion or the thought of my empty fridge. Whatever it was, I did it. Tears streaming down my face as I thought about my grandmother's death and my parents' divorce. I sent him the video. Seconds later, another request. This time for something darker, something twisted. He wanted me to vomit into a bowl for $500. My hands shook as I grabbed a bowl from the kitchen cabinet. The bile rose in my throat as much from disgust as from what I was about to do. But again, I did it. The request escalated from there. A handful of hair cut off with a knife for $1,000. And each time, I told myself it would be the last one, until he asked for something impossible. Cut off your finger, he wrote. $10,000. I snapped then, screamed at him through the screen before blocking his account entirely. My chest heaved as I slammed my laptop shut and stumbled into the bathroom to wash away the shame clinging to my skin like oil. That's when my phone buzzed. The same username had found me on Instagram. He sent screenshots, videos, everything we'd exchanged on OnlyFans. And then came the message that froze my blood. Meet me at the park with a knife, or everyone sees this. I didn't have a choice, or at least it felt that way in the moment. My hands trembled as I tucked a knife into the waistband of my leggings and walked into the cold night air toward the park. The place was deserted except for one figure. A homeless man passed out on a bench with an empty bottle by his side. My phone buzzed again. Since you won't cut your finger, cut his. Time stop. I approached him slowly, knife shaking in my hand like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He didn't stir as I lifted his pinky finger into the air and brought down the blade in one swift motion. His scream shattered the silence as I ran. Ran faster than I ever had before, all the way back home where safety felt like an illusion. But it wasn't over. My phone rang again, this time from my mother's number. "What's wrong with you?" She screamed through sobs. "Why would you do this?" And that's when it hit me. The man hadn't just been watching me online. He'd been watching everything. Even now, as I sit here telling you the story, every shadow feels like him lurking just out of sight, waiting for his next move while I wait for mine. Because some nightmares don't end when you wake up. They just change shape and follow you into daylight. If you enjoyed these stories, then do subscribe to Horror Vault to continue watching our unique collection of true horror stories.